like to welcome everyone to Anxiety in Youth in an Ever-Changing Global World, Impacts on School Relationships or Daily Functioning, provided by the PA Care Partnership Grant in association with the Office of Mental Health and Substance Abuse Services, also known as OMSAS. During the presentation, please type your questions into the Q&A feature, which you will find by running your mouse along the bottom of the Zoom screen. When you put your questions in the Q&A, if you could let us know if you would like to ask that question on screen, that would be great. Today's moderators are part of the PA Care Partnership. You have myself, Jamal Ford, Youth Resources Coordinator with the partnership. I will be monitoring Q&A, and we have Nancy Massey, who will be monitoring chat, and I will toss it over to her to introduce our speakers.
Oh,
you're
Nancy.
On mute, Nancy.
Sorry. Thank you. Thank you, Jamal. We are pleased to have Rachel Foster-Love, Ph.D., who is a Center of Counseling and Wellness within State College, and Kristen Smith-Simon, Ph.D., who is an Assistant Clinical Professor with the Penn State Psychological Clinic. In this presentation, Dr. Love and Dr. Smith-Simon will be speaking to us as a panel, and we'll discuss what anxiety looks like in children of all ages, from preschool to college. In addition, they will cover how anxiety can be helpful and interfere from children's school experience to engaging with friends, family, and the community. Today's presentation will also include the influence of the caregiver's own emotions and the surrounding culture of understanding and expressing anxiety. You will leave with strategies and ideas on how to help and support youth and additional resources for the audience to access. This presentation is interactive. You're invited to leave questions to be answered during the presentation, as well as plenty of time for Q&A discussion after the presentation. And I turn it over to Kristen and Rachel.
Hi, everyone. Welcome. Rachel and I are really happy to be here today talking to you all about this. This is an area of work that both of us spend a lot of our professional time in. And it's kind of one of the things that I think, all of us who are working in the practice field right now understand to be a pretty significant issue facing our youth. And the adults who are in the role of caring for our youth. We're going to certainly talk a lot about the emotion of anxiety, the ways in which it can be helpful, as well as the ways that it can be problematic and cause some interference across development. We're not going to focus on specific anxiety disorders necessarily within our presentation. However, we've kind of built this presentation to allow for questions and discussion. We can take some questions kind of during the presentation. We might kind of say, hold on, we're going to get to that in a little bit, but we've also really made sure that we've left time to be able to answer any questions that or discussion points that folks have. As we go along, and certainly if there are things that we don't cover in the discussion that you have some curiosities about, we're happy to be helpful as much as we can be. Anxiety disorders, right, which is different than the emotion of anxiety, are really among the most common mental health issues that our youth are facing right now. And there are some newer research showing that these issues are on the rise. So they were already kind of at a high level, but certainly in the last several years, we've got some information that more and more children are dealing with some pretty significant levels of anxiety. Following the beginning of the pandemic, some of the newer surveys are kind of suggesting that maybe as high as 1 in 5 children might be experiencing some pretty significant levels of anxiety. You can kind of understand it if you understand the emotion of anxiety being triggered if you're having a difficult time predicting what's happening around you, feeling safe, being able to guarantee that the things that are important to you and valuable to you are going to be available to you. If you're watching your parents or other people in your community, teachers, coaches, other people that you're working with, if you're watching them kind of have some worries and concerns about the state of the world, you can understand how that would also be a factor affiliated with kids kind of having some increases in anxiety right now. So in and of itself, anxiety is something that we need to pay attention to, but it's also affiliated with other mental health issues. So a very high proportion of children who experience anxiety also experience mood issues, and anxiety can be part of kind of all other types of mental health concerns that children might have. Learning issues, ADHD, autism spectrum kinds of things, very commonly experienced with anxiety as well. So it's a timely and important topic for us to be paying attention to. Today, we're really going to kind of focus on a few specific areas. We're not going to do kind of like a full comprehensive DSM review of some of the stuff going on for kiddos. But we're going to make sure that we talk about thanks. Sorry, Jamal, I forgot to say, please shift to the next slide. We're going to talk about like what anxiety looks like across development. We're going to talk about how anxiety as an emotion can be helpful as well as interfering. We're going to talk about the influence of kind of the caregiver experience and expression of emotions and emotion regulation themselves. We're also going to talk about how to be helpful. So if we notice that a child might be in a position of needing some support, we're going to talk about some strategies and some resources available. And like I said, we want this to be interactive. And so we welcome discussion points or questions and answers, but we've definitely carved out time at the end as well. Okay, we're ready for the next slide. Thank you. So anxiety is actually a very helpful emotion. It's a very normal emotion. We would actually be quite concerned if a person didn't experience any amount of anxiety. It might make us feel bad, but it actually helps us navigate some of the challenges that we encounter on day-to-day life. There's actually a really good reason why we have anxiety, and we'll go into a little bit more later on, but it's really the emotion of safety, protection, planning, organizing, reflecting on our responses to the environment. So we really want it around because it keeps us safe and actually helps us go through life in a healthy and helpful way. There are also, kind of in addition to the more general normative reasons why we have anxiety and want anxiety to be there, we also kind of know that across development, there are specific types of anxiety that are more common for kiddos in different age groups. And so it's always important when we're understanding a child who might be experiencing significant symptoms of anxiety to kind of come at it through a developmental framework and understand what they're experiencing within the context of what might be a fairly common or normative experience for them. So Rachel, I think.
So you're ready for me to jump in?
Yeah, absolutely.
So when we think about that idea of normative, developmentally expected sort of worry, anxiety, just like we have milestones for walking, talking, we also kind of have that for emotions as well. And so when we think of anxiety, we think about when an infant is in that 6 to 8 months, 6 to 9 months range where they're developing object permanence. And so they've hit that stage where they know that if somebody disappears, they still exist. And that also then lines up with them building that sort of caregiver hierarchy of who their primary attachment figure is. And then if that person's not available, who can, who's the next best choice and the next best choice and the next best choice. So with that, then you also get that differentiating between familiar versus unfamiliar caregivers. And so, when we're looking at in infancy and that first year, we're looking to see, we're expecting that there will be some distress if a child is presented with a caregiver that is unfamiliar. Also in this age group, we can talk in terms of like attachment theory, where, the whole idea of attachment is the ability to, it's proximity, the zone of proximity. Like they can go out and explore, but if they go too far, then they trigger that attachment mechanism, which increases their anxiety. So then they return to their caregiver to check in. So, that kind of, if a kid gets too far, we expect there to be a little anxiety if they don't see their caregiver, and then returning and the anxiety going away. And then as children get older, we expect those sort of things to level out a little bit. And then there are other things that come in, being afraid of the dark, being afraid of, not being able to find your parent if you're out somewhere. We always talk about how I had this discussion with a colleague a very long time ago that the beginning of like Disney movies are always so traumatic because the parents typically die, but it's one of those things that's such a huge, normative fear early on about, what if I lose my parents? What if I can't find my parents? And that's why we kind of have those discussions with kids as well. Like, if you can't find me, go to this person. So that's a pretty, from, 2 to like 5 or 6, pretty typical. And then, whenever I'm working with kids and I ask them, well, what are you afraid of? And I always have my common go-to if they're quiet, like, are you afraid of the dark? Are you afraid of thunder? Are you afraid of bees? And then they're always like, yep. Afraid of all of those things. And those are very normative and very typical for school age kids. And then, of course, as we get into the tween and teen years, we, fully expect there to be, worries about, comparisons to peers and what their peers are saying about them and how do they fit in? Do they fit in? Because, as we're moving through that adolescent developmental period, it's that whole idea of transitioning away from family system into peer system. So we expect there to be worry and anxiety about how they're fitting into that. And then as they get, closer to that young adulthood transition, then it is about, who are they going to be? Who do they want to be as adults? And trying to figure out all of those pieces. We expect there to be those conversations around like, what can I do? Who can I be? What will it look like out there? So those are that's sort of our framework. Those are our benchmarks to compare, like, all right, are you having the worry we would expect at this point about your life transition, or is this something greater that's impacting? And when we drift into anxiety disorders, Kristen is going to tell us more about that.
Yeah. So I hope that thus far we've really kind of done a nice job establishing that like anxiety is a fairly normal experience for all of us, and at certain points across development, we would actually expect anxiety to be a little elevated for certain kinds of issues. When we start getting into the world of an anxiety disorder, we're really thinking about attending within this developmental framework. Is this greater than what we would expect a child to be managing right now? Is it causing significant distress? And what's important about that concept is that we're not just talking about the distress of the child, we're also talking about this distress of the system, right? Because there might be a situation in which a child might have some very significant, for example, separation anxiety from parents, and they are actually not particularly distressed if they're allowed to be with mom and dad, but the distress might be on mom and dad's side because they are having a hard time kind of managing life with a child who is really not allowing for that kind of independence that's appropriate for that age. And so, kind of pushing the system out even a little bit further, other folks who might be involved in a child's life could be experiencing a lot of the distress the distress that comes from a child's really elevated anxiety, if you can imagine. School staff, right? They're just trying to be helpful and navigate the world with kids and teach them. And gosh, a kiddo who's having a really hard time getting in the door in the morning can put a real stress on the guidance counselors and the teachers and the emotion support teachers and the principals, all the people who are part of that team to help that kiddo out. They can feel a pretty decent amount of distress because the child's level of anxiety is so significant that it's really stressing the system in terms of things that need to be done or the child wants to be able to do. So we think about distress, certainly within the child's experience, but also within the system that child exists in. And then causing an impairment of functioning, right? So if we think about kind of a basic rule of anxiety levels are significant enough that they're getting in the way of what you need to do, what you want to do, then we can see that there are many examples in which very elevated levels of anxiety can get in the way of doing stuff that we need our kids to do. Go to school, make friends, sleep independently, transition to activities outside of the home, try new things, give themselves the opportunity to develop competence and confidence in their ability to navigate the world. If the anxiety is getting in the way of them being able to have those opportunities and experiences, then we would say we might be kind of in that space where we would consider an anxiety disorder being an appropriate way to understand what's going on for a kiddo. Thank you. So branching off disorders, we're going to spend a little bit of time talking about that emotion of anxiety and how it's helpful.
Yeah, there are absolutely times when it's a good thing to have a little bit of anxiety, like, going on a trip. My whole family's getting ready to go and we're all all the grownups are a little anxious thinking about all the things we have to get in place. So, we're focused, we're planning, trying to keep it all together. So, just kind of throwing it out to everybody, what are some examples you can think of in which anxiety is helpful? You can pop it in the chat.
I know for me, I know you're looking for things in the chat, but I always think about little kids and being out in public or whatever, away from their parents and being sort of anxious about your surroundings and where you are and all of that stuff, stranger danger, all of that kind of stuff. So that's like one of the things that always popped in my head.
Yeah, I'm seeing in the chat a lot of sort of, planning for the worst case scenario, getting, on flights, trusting your instincts, starting a new job, being able to think quickly. I think once in like performing at your best, there's this great thing of like that upside down U, and I'm trying to think, it was like the zone of optimal functioning where the anxiety is at just the right amount to increase your performance. But then like if the anxiety keeps going, then your performance falls down the hill. Buying a home, absolutely. Oh yeah, pregnancy and giving birth, there's always, you want to make sure you know all the stuff. These are great examples of times when having just that optimal amount of anxiety can really help have maximum power, as somebody just said. Oh yeah, transitioning from staying at home to going back to work full time. Yeah, I think everybody is sort of getting ready for that transition, or a lot of us are. Oh yeah, crowds. Yeah, these are really good examples.
So one of the things that I think it's always important to remember when you're getting ready to talk about the problems that emotions cause us is to remember that we have emotions for a reason. They are part of our neurological system to help us, right? So you can kind of think about, take a step back and say, like, well, what is the function of anxiety? Like, why would we have it? Why would we have developed as a species to have this emotion that actually makes us feel quite terrible and makes us think about things that are stressful and overwhelming? From a functional perspective, anxiety is an emotion that's designed to keep us safe, right? If we had no anxiety, then our alarm system, we're in a bad situation, something bad is going on right now, I'm at risk, this is dangerous, wouldn't be there to protect us, right? So anxiety is an emotion that's affiliated with triggering that alarm system. This is not a good situation to be in. This is not a safe situation. So there's some kind of threat to me right now. And part of what results from that is we get a sharpened focus, right? Now that alarm system has gone off, and now I need to sharpen my focus to understand more clearly what it is that's going on here. And I need to be able to plan, and I need to be able to plan quickly, right? So I'm sure you have all heard about the fight or flight system, right? That's kind of like the instantaneous planning that goes on when that alarm system is triggered. There's an incredible number of physiological changes that happen within us once that alarm system goes off in our brain. And it's like split second kinds of physiological changes, right? So examples are things like our cell walls become more permeable to allow for glucose and oxygen to enter and fuel our muscles, allowing us to fight or flee. Our metabolism slows down. It is less important to be digesting your breakfast than it is to be running from the bear that you just came across on the hiking trail. And so there's a diversion of resources within our body away from the digestive system out to our muscles and our arms and legs, because those are the parts of our body that need to be well resourced to keep us safe, right? So the system turns on very quickly and functions to prepare ourselves for staying alive, essentially. So when we think about anxiety, fear, you can kind of think about it as being a very functional emotion to sharpen our focus, get us into a position where safety is our number one priority, and plan for keeping us safe. When we get into the emotion of worry, slightly different than fear or anxiety. It's really about kind of like what could happen so that I can prepare and plan, right? So Rachel kind of gave an example of, okay, well, a child might be getting ready to go on a vacation, right? Oh, I'm worried that I'm going to forget something that I might need. I'm worried that someone is going to fall and cut their knee. And so I'm making a plan to pack some bandages and pack some some Neosporin, right? I am feeling worried about doing poorly on this presentation. And so I'm going to plan to work on it in advance. I'm going to plan to rehearse it a little bit. I'm going to plan to do some fact checking. So worry as an emotion can also feel pretty overwhelming and terrible at some points, but its goal is actually to help us be thoughtful, be planful, put into place an action plan to keep us doing the things that we need to do and the things that we want to do. And then finally, this reflection concept is that, life happens. Sometimes it works out in a way that feels good. Sometimes it works out in a way that doesn't feel so great. Anxiety, worry can actually be a nice emotion that kicks in to help you reflect on what has happened so you can think through it a little bit and make a different plan in anticipation of what might happen next time around. So anxiety and worry can actually be extremely helpful emotions. When we think about it that way, you can probably understand, like, gosh, if someone had no anxiety or worry, that would be quite problematic in terms of them navigating the world successfully. So I think we wanted to just make sure to highlight, yes, we're going to talk about some of the difficulties that arise when anxiety is significant and impairing, but always keep in mind that our goal is never to alleviate anxiety and worry fully. It's our goal to make sure that those emotions are well matched to the situations that we're in, and at the right level, right? We want you to have real high anxiety as you're standing on the edge of the Grand Canyon, right? We want you to have real low anxiety if you are playing soccer with your friends at the park, right? So something to keep in mind. I think we're ready for the next slide, Jamal. So anxiety, worry, great in a whole bunch of ways, but obviously we wouldn't be sitting here together today if they didn't also have some concerning and interfering impacts on our lives and for kids' development. So we want to think about kind of this concept of interfering as when those emotions are getting in the way of doing the things that you need to do and the things that you want to do. They're no longer helping, they're now getting in the way. They're providing a barrier for things that are healthy and important for you. So we talked a little bit about, part of how we understand getting in the way of things that you want or need to do is to be thoughtful about if this situation actually does warrant some anxiety, and is someone experiencing anxiety at the right level, right? So for example, it might make sense to feel a little anxious about taking a math test when it's been a concept that's really tricky and you've had to really put some good work in to understand it. A little bit of anxiety probably makes a ton of sense. So much anxiety that you have a terrible stomach ache and headache and don't go to school that day is disproportionate to the situation, right? Taking a math test, yes, a little bit of anxiety makes a ton of sense. So much anxiety that you can't go to school that day is out of line with matching the situation. Or if it's misplaced, right? So we interpret a situation to be scary, dangerous, risky, when in fact it is not. So if you think about children who maybe are having a very difficult time at the correct developmental age, right? Sleeping independently. A 10-year-old, we would expect developmentally to be able to sleep independently. So if the anxiety is present, gosh, if I go to sleep in my own room, something terrible is going to happen to me, something terrible is going to happen to my parents or guardians. It's not safe for me to be here in my own bed, in my house. gosh, we would say that probably isn't matching the situation. It's being interpreted as a risky, dangerous, alert situation when it really is unlikely to be the case. This is also a good time to kind of pause with a bit of a caveat and say that some of the examples that we might talk about, we're talking about kind of in generalities, right? There are definitely situations in which a child probably should be worried or nervous to be in a particular home or a particular environment and things like that. So we're not saying like blanket, this is normal, this is abnormal. We're saying like in an objectively safe situation, if a child is having that alarm system go off, that is what we would say is a mismatch in terms of the experience of anxiety and the situation that they're in. Anxiety, we talked about, it's the emotion of avoidance, right? There has been danger detected, risk detected. I need in some way to kind of stay away from this in order to feel better. So when we're thinking about something like the goal of self-sufficiency as children are navigating the world, we kind of think about like over the course of a child's life, one of the major developmental goals is independence, right? From the time they're born to the time they're kind of leaving the nest, they're working towards this ability to feel confident that they can do and they can learn, and competent that they have been doing and they have been learning. We want that confidence and competence to be part of their development. And so, when we're thinking about how anxiety can interfere with self-sufficiency, if children are not having the opportunity to go into situations where they have to navigate new things, try new stuff out, push through a little bit of discomfort, they're never getting the opportunity to develop a sense of confidence in their ability to do so. They're never developing a sense of competence, like, yeah, this was something that was different for me or hard for me or challenging for me or scary for me. And I did it and now I'm good at it. And this feels really, I can feel really proud of myself for being able to do this. Because if we're anxious and we don't do it, we miss out on those opportunities to develop those experiences. But this is obviously all embedded within relationships, right? So part of a child having the opportunity to develop that self-sufficiency is also being within a system that encourages and supports those safe attempts to try out new things and venture a little bit further and push through some distress and learn about things that are maybe different than what they understand. And so we have to kind of be thoughtful about kind of how the system can support and encourage kids to develop that sense of self-sufficiency. Anxiety can interfere certainly with some relationship building types of aspects of life, right? And we're kind of thinking about that reciprocal back and forth with families, with siblings, with peers, with teachers, with coaches, other important figures in a child's life. Certainly when we're thinking about kind of anxiety being activated and interfering with kind of venturing out a little bit, it is going to impact relationship development. That might look like appropriate boundaries and responsibilities. So making sure that kids are actually having the opportunity to try things out, including meeting new people, going to an activity that might be a little unfamiliar and different to them. But also kind of learning from a relationship perspective that my parents trust that I can do this. They feel confident they're sending me the message that the world is an okay place to try out and to reach into. So, we know that sometimes when parents or primary caregivers have a significant amount of anxiety themselves, they have their own worries or stress about allowing some of that independence with kids, and that can interfere with them providing some opportunities for kids to develop this agency. And kind of a whole host of other negative emotions can happen in those kinds of reciprocal interactions. It helps kids learn. If we're avoiding being with new people, it interferes with us learning, like other people are safe, other people are good, other people have interesting things to teach us and help us learn about the world. It can get in the way of making friends and missing out on all of that good connection and fun that comes from play and interaction with people your own age. As kids get older, it's really important for them to understand that beyond their caregivers, that there are other good people around who are sources of help and education and fun and learning, and that's like, those are good relationships to develop. And then we think about kind of opportunities for skill development, right? We understand the adage, practice makes perfect, right? If kids are getting the opportunity to practice tolerating a little bit of stress, regulating their emotions, that actually helps them be better emotion regulators. If they're having the opportunity to try new things out, it's actually helping them gather information about what is safe, what's not safe, what are appropriate behaviors, what aren't appropriate behaviors, who is to be trusted, who isn't to be trusted. It helps them actually gather the evidence that we want them to use to ultimately make decisions. Dangerous situation, anxiety warranted, or not dangerous situation, I'm okay. And learn actually that you can have a bad experience and still be okay. Those are things that are really important for kids to learn. And then certainly from a health perspective, we talked about it, there's a really strong physiological component to anxiety. There's really, we don't have much control over, once that system is triggered, all of these things that are going on in our bodies, which are fine if they're happening periodically. But if someone is experiencing chronic anxiety and chronic worry, and all of these physiological things are happening constantly, that can take a pretty significant toll on our physical health as well. It can impact sleep. It can certainly impact kind of gut health, right? There's some good research about cardiovascular health that is impacted by chronic stress, chronic anxiety. And Rachel, I think you were going to talk a little bit about kind of the neurological changes.
Absolutely. So, and that can go all the way back to like prenatal. So if biological mom experiences clinical levels of anxiety and trauma, that certainly can then cause changes in central nervous system development, and which then, impacts development. But for infants and young children and teens and adult, all the way across, if you are constantly exposed to high levels of anxiety, trauma, that changes how your brain responds and regulates. So we all have, in the morning, our brain just naturally produces cortisol, and we have this early morning spike in cortisol, which is what gets us up and moving. And then across the day, our cortisol starts to fall, which is why we get a little sleepy in the afternoon. And as that cortisol is falling during the day, then our natural melatonin starts to rise, which gets us ready to go to bed at nighttime. And so those systems work, in conjunction. Now, when you're exposed to high levels of stress, trauma, and anxiety, that cortisol is important in your fight or flight, that cortisol and adrenaline, which activates you So if you're constantly being activated, you're constantly being flooded with cortisol. So then what happens is that you can have one of two scenarios for kids as they develop who have had this overexposure. You can have a blunted response, which means that it takes a whole lot of fear input to activate your fight or flight. These are the kids that, they're very blunted. Just they don't know how to react in the face of fear. They're just sort of numbed to it. And then on the other side are kids who become super sensitive to cortisol. And that means they have larger than expected responses to very small stimuli because their body is so used to having to activate that it will activate at anything. So that is one of the reasons when, we have that constant exposure, we want to put in strategies to help kids kind of reduce those responses. I think we can go to the next slide. One of the things that Kristen talked about earlier was the influence of caregivers. And this can be on the positive to the neutral to the negative. How adults sort of present themselves in a situation becomes either a reinforcer or it'd be a punishment, but like Kristen, help me with words. It would deactivate. It's not the word I want. Having word finding issues. So if a parent says to a kid, good job, way to go. I love how you, got in there on your first day versus, did you do okay? How was it? Was it all right? Were the people nice? Was it all right? Did you miss mommy too much? Yeah. Those responses, kids can read us like a book. They're really good at tuning in to how adults are feeling and presenting. And there's a really cool study of infants who, after being exposed to different adults, would shift their play style and their response style based on the grown-up that's in front of them. So kids can read us like a book, which means we want to make sure that we aren't accidentally modeling and shaping anxious behaviors. So, if every time a kid trips just a little and the adult in the room goes, then that kiddo becomes very attuned to little things becoming big responses. And just like I went, it's not just the words that we say, it's our body language as well. It's our nonverbals. So we might be saying like, I hope you have a good day. But if we're like, I hope you have a good day, we're sending this mixed message. Just woke up my dog. Go back to sleep. We send this mixed message of it's okay, but it's not okay. And additionally, like the adult in charge of the child, how they structure the environment is the opportunity that the child gets to practice. So if I'm not really a fan of climbing or being in high places, I'm going to avoid playgrounds for my kids that have big climbers, and I'm going to look for places that just have swings. So then my kiddo's not going to have that opportunity to practice climbing and getting used to that skill. Same with if I'm not comfortable with crowds, therefore I'm selecting to not go to busy places. I'm not going to go to the store when it's busy. We're not going to go, to festivals or those kinds of things because I don't like crowds. Then the kiddos in my care aren't going to have the opportunity to build the skills to regulate through those, and instead are kind of learning that like those are not okay. So the influence of the caregiver isn't just what they say, it's our nonverbals, it's how we're kind of, structuring the environment to look like and the activities that we do. And those will all then pass down to the kiddo. All right, we can go to the next slide. So you thinking about that kids can read us like a book, and we need to be aware, sort of like all our P's and Q's. For those of us working with children, working with families, we want to make sure that we're not only modeling for the child, but we're modeling for parents or teachers, families that are systems that have come to us for help. So we want to use our emotion language that is honest and developmentally sensitive. Sometimes it's really important to say to a child, like, yeah, you're feeling kind of scared right now. That's okay. You can be scared. And, we go back to that idea of what's developmentally appropriate. If there's a child who's afraid of the dark, rather than, giving them a hard time for being afraid of the dark, just kind of recognizing, like, yeah, sometimes being in the dark doesn't feel good because we can't see what's in the room with us and we don't know what's there. And that's okay. It's all right. We can figure this out. So through that, we're sort of already creating this safety net for this kiddo to know that what they're feeling is okay. They don't have to be embarrassed by what they're feeling. They don't have to hide how they're feeling. It's something that we can talk about. Because a lot of times we don't talk about the things we're afraid of. We kind of push them to the side. So just opening that door becomes a tool in itself. We can even then model for them emotion regulation. So we can walk into a space.
Jamal, can you go down to the next slide? I actually think that there's an emotion language slide next. And then, so Rachel, I don't know if there was anything on that emotion language slide, because you were just talking about that you wanted to make sure you covered before we walk on to modeling emotion regulation.
Oh, sure. Yep. We could just tie it all together. So when we're talking about emotion language, we want to make sure that we're labeling that experience for the child. They don't feel comfortable. This is overwhelming. They might be unsure, all of those things. We're giving that child the vocabulary. So then later on, when they have that same sensation, they can add that word to, which is very important, that we're going to talk about in a little bit, that idea of thoughts, sensations, and actions and words. But we also want to make sure that the kid knows that their feeling's okay. Whatever emotion is coming up, that's all right. We'll deal with the emotion that's there. And our language is so important because it becomes their internal voice. How we speak to them is how they're going to speak to themselves. So if we give them a hard time about what they're feeling and sort of become judgmental, then they will become judgmental and they're going to tuck it away even more. So if we can say, like, yeah, we're going to go meet your new friends today. And yeah, you might feel a little unsure, and walking into a new place, definitely it's, it takes us a moment to get comfortable, but we can do it. And you've got this. And I'm right next to you. And you've got your, favorite squishy with you to squish and to hold on to. It'll be all right. All right, Jamal, can we bump back? And so when we talk about the idea of modeling, we can say to a child, like, whew, feeling a bit anxious. We're going on this trip and I got a long list to do. So, I'm going to sit and breathe. I'm going to take a nice big breath in and I'm going to let it out. I feel better. Now I can get my stuff done. When we say out loud how we are feeling and what's going on for us, we are again building for them strategies and ways to recognize, like, oh, okay, this doesn't have to be the end of the world. I'm feeling really high, but that doesn't mean my day has to stop because I'm super keyed up. The world hasn't ended. I can come back down. And similarly, we want to, even if our anxiety, isn't about climbing, if we don't want to climb, we still want to scaffold for a kiddo how to make that approach, how to warm up. You know, we talk about kids that are slow to warm up. We always want to give kids time to acclimate. And we're right there with them. We're encouraging, we're supporting, we're kind of neutral. Like, it's no big deal. We can, if you have kids and you go to the community pool and there's a big water slide and they want to do the slide, to scaffold and reinforce approach behaviors is, let's go look at the stairs. Let's go check it out. Let's go up the stairs. Fantastic. I love how you're coming up the stairs. Yeah, these are a lot of steps. We could count the steps. And then once you get up there, like, oh, wow, the slide's yellow. Or, oh, yeah, the water's loud. The water's kind of warm. There are lifeguards up here that you can talk to. So we're just walking them through, and we're scaffolding, and we're nudging forward gently, and we're knowing when to pause. And the other thing that is important to know is that we're also helping kids, and again, we're going to talk about this later with our triangle, is that, you know, how our mind is feeling and how our body is feeling is really connected. So if we're feeling scared and anxious, like Kristen was talking about, we can have those like headaches, we can have stomach aches, we can have bubbly tummies. And you can tell that I work with a lot younger kids because I'm talking about bubbly tummies. I wouldn't probably do that with a 16-year-old. They would roll their eyes like nobody's business. But we can talk about that bubbly tummy and what we need. Does belly breathing help our bubbly tummy? So we also, when we're working in ways to help, we want to pair it with what's going on for that child. If their head feels like there's a lot going on, then we might do some head massage to help get those thoughts moving so it doesn't feel so jammed up. But the other thing that's really important to recognize is that nobody has to do this alone. If you have a kiddo that is either your kiddo or a kiddo that you're working with or a friend's kiddo or another family's kiddo, you don't have to do it by yourself. You don't have to have all the answers. You don't have to be this perfect receptacle of all things great and wondrous. Know when extra help is a good thing. Know when fresh eyes are good, a different perspective, somebody who might have different training, or when, like, if you're afraid of dogs and your kid's afraid of dogs, or the family you're working with is afraid of dogs, like, you know, let's tag in somebody who maybe doesn't have a fear of dogs to work through that exposure. So it's always good to ask for help. All right, we can go to the next slide. Because also, when we ask for help, we're modeling that it's okay to ask for help. All right, oh, we did this one, so we can go to the next one. And I think, Kristen, I can't remember, is this you or me?
You kind of talked a little bit about it, but I'll just pick up on some points that we didn't cover a couple slides ago. Just important to kind of keep in mind for all of us who work with not only kids, adolescents, college students, right? Because this is like across the developmental span as youth are growing, is that people learn about a situation from the responses that other people around them are giving. So for younger kids, they'll learn from kind of their immediate environment, parents, guardians, grandparents, preschool teachers, all of those people. They're going to watch and learn what are situations that warrant a particular emotional response. How are these people handling this emotion? They learn from them. And as they move out into the community, they start to make observations about, what are my friends doing, right? Are they worried about this? Are they scared about this? Are they avoiding doing something? What are the teachers doing? What are the guidance counselors telling us? What are my coaches telling us? They're looking to other people for cues about how to make sense of situations, especially those that are kind of new to them and they're trying to kind of wrap their head around this new experience. And so they're paying attention to what the people around them are doing, which, in kind of keeping with what Rachel had mentioned earlier about emotion language, it becomes really important to be honest with kids about emotional life, right? So a very typical example might be, a teenager saying to, an adult, like, well, why are you so mad just because I was 5 minutes late past curfew? And they say, I'm not mad. I'm not mad. What are you talking about? I'm not. You're mad, right? So yes, you're right. I am mad that you were 5 minutes late. I thought we had an agreement. We explained that, being able to go out is an opportunity to demonstrate some responsibility and independence. You violated that. I'm a little mad about it. Right? So we're honest with kids. I'm scared that shot's going to hurt. No, it's not going to hurt. You'll be fine. No, it might hurt. Right? So let's just be honest, right? Within a developmental framework, but use our language to say, like, yes, it actually might hurt. It might hurt for like a couple seconds, and then it might hurt. You might have a sore arm for a few hours. That's true. You're going to be okay. You're going to be okay. It's going to hurt, and you're going to be okay. Right? So we're modeling to kids, yes, we have emotions as adults, and also we know how to regulate them. Right? So I think Rachel gave the example of, like, I'm going to take a couple deep breaths, I'm going to calm myself down, then I'm going to handle this, right? But we can also model for children and youth, right? When we say children, I'm kind of using like a blanket word. This is applicable to, people who are getting ready to leave for college or join the military or get a job because they're graduating from high school and finishing that phase of life. We can say things like, yeah, it makes sense to be nervous, right? I'm nervous, right? There are some big things going on. I'm a little nervous about it, but I think we're going to do it anyway. I'm going to do it anyway, right? I'm feeling nervous to do this. I've never done it before. I'm going to do it anyway. I'm going to see how it goes. Pretty sure that I'll be okay, but I know that if something goes wrong, it's probably also going to be okay. Right. So we help model some of the skills we want children to internalize, right? Yeah, it's scary to move away from home for the first time. I totally get it. You might be thinking about, like, who's going to make sure there's food for me and what's going to happen. If I feel sick, is someone going to call the doctor? You might be having those thoughts. It's totally okay. Right. You're also going to be okay. What's your evidence for that, right? Like, well, you know what? You've had a stomach ache before and you've gotten up and you've gone to the medicine cabinet and you've grabbed some medicine and you've laid down and you've handled it. You've got some evidence. And we say that for ourselves too, right? Like getting ready to start. I think some of the example situations were like getting married or starting a new job or moving someplace, right? Being able to say, like, yeah, I'm a little nervous to move to this new community that we've never been, it's making me a little worried, like, where are we going to get our groceries and what doctor are we going to go to and how long is it going to take to get to school in the morning? But we'll figure it out, right? We'll do a little bit of planning. We'll maybe like map out on the GPS, or maybe we'll get in the car and drive there. We'll like look at the bus schedule and we'll like figure out what buses we're going to, and then we're going to try it out. And then we're going to show ourselves that we're okay. So we can do that as adults too. But it's important to acknowledge as an adult to kids, yes, I have emotions. I get mad sometimes. I get scared sometimes. I get worried sometimes. I get happy sometimes. I get sad sometimes. Those are normal emotions and I have them too. And this is how I take care of them myself. I think we're ready to go to the next slide, Jamal. So when we think about really any emotion, this is not specific to anxiety or worry. We think about there being three major components to what's going on for an individual: the thoughts that they're having, how they're talking to themselves, the sensations that are happening internally, right? So if you think about it, like you're very angry, you might actually feel kind of hot. If you're feeling anxious, your stomach might feel like it's going to throw up. If you're feeling sad, you might feel very low energy, right? So we think about kind of physical sensations that go along with an emotion. And then we think about how we act. So one of the things that's important to kind of think about these three components, thoughts, sensations and body or behavior, is to say these are the things that actually create emotions, maintain emotions, and provide the opportunity for changing an emotion. And they really influence each other. The reason why we put them on a triangle is really to demonstrate how that, I think the image is a little messed up. Theoretically, the words are supposed to be kind of like at the points on the triangle, but to show how like the behavior point actually shares a leg with the thoughts point, and it also shares a leg with the sensations point, and the thoughts point shares a leg down to the behaviors and down to the sensations. So these influence each other. Some people might experience particular parts of an emotion experience more saliently, right? They might be really in tune with those worried thoughts or those scared thoughts. Some people might not be able to articulate the thoughts very clearly, but gosh, are they able to tell you my heart is racing? I don't think, it doesn't feel like I can swallow. I feel like I'm going to need to use the bathroom. My legs are shaky. I feel like I'm going to pass out. They're very in tune with the physiological sensations of what's happening for them emotionally. And that might change in different situations, right? Someone might be able to go into, a new social situation and be very in tune. Like, I'm worried that, no one's going to like me, or they're going to think I'm going to say something stupid, or they're going to talk about me behind my back, and someone's going to make a post about it, and the whole school's going to know about this post. They're very in tune in that situation about the thought component to it. But gosh, if they're going into like go get a vaccination, they might just be feeling really strong physiological reaction to that anxiety emotion. So some people will just feel certain, like recognize those points on the triangle a little bit differently, but sometimes just the situation will dictate a little bit about which one is maybe a little bit more salient. What becomes really helpful, if you think about these component parts to an emotion, is that it gives you a roadmap for how to be helpful for a person who is experiencing a lot of anxiety. Again, if this is too high for the situation or a mismatch, this is not a risky, dangerous, worrisome situation, right? Again, because we want that anxiety to be a good signal for people if they are in an objectively dangerous, worrisome situation, so that they can learn from that emotion and make an appropriate plan for their safety. So this is like when we're talking about turning this emotion volume down, we're thinking about it like there's some mismatch going on for them and when they need to regulate. So it provides a roadmap, right? Okay, so if my thoughts are, I'm going to go to this person's party, and they're going to, I'm going to like take a bite of cake and like spit out some food while I'm talking to someone, and everyone's going to laugh at me, and they're going to think that I'm totally gross and clumsy, and no one's going to want to hang out with me. No one's going to ask me to go to a party again. Someone's going to like jump on Instagram immediately and like talk about what a doofus I am in some capacity. And then the whole school's going to know about it, and no one's going to sit with me at lunch on Monday. One of the things that we can do is kind of like, okay, yep, you might make a mistake. You might spit some food. You might say something that does not land well with others, and someone might not respond to it well. What else might happen? Now let's start to gather some information, right? Have you been to a party before? Yeah. Have you spit food on people? Well, one time. Okay. What happened when you spit food on them? Everyone laughed, and then they kind of like let it go. Okay. So that's a piece of information we can pay attention to. I've been to several parties before. One time I did spit some food out. There was a laugh, but then people let it go pretty fast. Okay. So now maybe I can think about this like, yes, I'm going to go to this party. There is the possibility that I might do something kind of embarrassing, like spit some food out while I'm talking. But I don't know that everyone is going to have a really terrible reaction to it. I don't know that there's going to be lots of catastrophic consequences that come, like people aren't going to want to be friends with me. People are going to make fun of me behind my back. I don't know that that's going to happen. Probably it's not going to happen. But if it does, worst case scenario, I make a mistake, people make fun of it, people talk about it for days afterwards. Are you going to be okay? You be able to like push through some really challenging moments? No. Have you had some challenging moments before? Yes. Did you push through it? Yes. So I'm here for you. You're probably going to be able to push through it. And you're probably, even if the worst thing happens, you're going to be okay, right? Because this is not dangerous. This is embarrassing for sure, right? We can help them kind of talk to themselves a little bit differently. If they're really activated physiologically, we've got some good relaxation kinds of strategies that we can teach kids, right? Diaphragmatic breathing is one of them, right? It's not grandma's, just take a deep breath. It's a specific way in which we breathe to turn the volume down because we're sending a signal back up to the brain. If I'm breathing calmly and slowly, I can't possibly be in danger, right? Because if that bear is chasing me, I'm not going to be breathing calmly and slowly. So we're actually, with our action, we're sending a message back up to our brain. You can turn that activation system down because I'm okay, right? So we can do some slow breathing, do some muscle relaxation, some imagery, some kinds of exercise. I think maybe Rachel, you're going to talk about that a little bit later. But there's ways that we can kind of say, yep, this is a physiological symptom of this emotion. Now, what do we do to turn the volume down on it? And then behaviors for anxiety and for worry, we think about approach instead of avoid, right? I'm afraid of a dog, but gosh, that dog is wagging its tail and licking that other person. So I can probably walk past that yard and trust that I'm going to be okay. Right. I'm scared to go to college. Like maybe I'm just not going to go. You know what? Disenroll, going from home. Well, why don't you go? See how it goes. Right. We encourage the approach behavior to give a person an opportunity to determine, can I handle it? Yes, probably. Does the terrible thing happen? No, probably. And were there good things that actually came from pushing through some of this distress and giving myself the opportunity to do something a little bit different or a little bit new? So you can kind of keep this triangle in mind when someone is expressing a lot of anxiety or worry about like, well, maybe there's a point of this that's like a little bit more salient to them right now, and how can I coach them through it? All right, I think we can go on to the next one. Yeah, thank you. And then maybe Rachel, you already talked about that.
I did a little bit, but I did want to come back to, that idea of approach behaviors. It is really about pushing them forward, because if we let a child or a kid or an adult escape in that high anxiety mode, then we're accidentally reinforcing that there's a reason to be scared. So it's sort of like if we go to a concert and our anxiety is sky high, so we leave, we've now reinforced the idea that crowds are dangerous and bad. So the next time we want to go to a concert, we're going to have a harder time going because the last time we left when our anxiety was so amplified. And, we've talked a lot about those approach behaviors and that scaffolding and that kind of nudging and pausing to let them go and talking positively. We want to be careful of, and we want to really help when we're working with teachers, coaches, family members, be mindful of their language. That's not how big kids act. Like, aren't you a big boy? Like, come on, like, don't be a baby, or even the, kind of the subtle, like everyone else is fine. Now, it's different if you say everyone's okay. It's different than everybody else is fine. So we want people to be mindful of their words and their tone. One of the things you'll also hear parents sometimes saying if they're having a hard time with a kiddo transitioning, well, if you don't come on, I'm just going to leave you. And we're then using fear as like a weapon because the child's afraid of being left. So now we're using it as this weapon of I'm going to leave you if you don't do what I want you to do. So we want to help families kind of change that language and move into a more proactive, supportive, reinforcing way. All right, we can go to the next slide.
All right. So, one of the things that's important to just kind of keep in mind, we talked about some specific emotion regulation kinds of concepts that we can model and we can teach, whether we're parents or teachers or physicians or school nurses. We also have to be kind of mindful of the larger system in which a child functions, and be thoughtful about other types of healthy behaviors that can keep the anxiety system in check. What we know about sleep is that tired brains simply do not function optimally. You need a certain amount of resource to regulate your emotions. Our brains are real energy sucks. And so if we are not refueling them every night, it is going to be inherently more difficult to manage the tasks of the day. So, there are guidelines regarding the amount of sleep a person at different ages might need, younger children needing a really significant chunk of sleep per night, but even teenagers, and I work with a fair number of teenagers who try to sell me on the notion that they actually do better if they've got fewer hours of sleep. It is simply not true. Even teenagers are like really in kind of like that 8 to 10 hours of sleep a night. In terms of sleep need, they might be able to get away with less sleep, but that does not mean that they are going to be functioning optimally if they get fewer hours of sleep. Exercise. Again, we know that exercise is a way to discharge some of the physiological activation of anxiety. I'm feeling my heart is racing, my muscles are tense, my stomach doesn't feel well. A good exercise helps just reset that physiological state of activation and helps the body calm down a little bit. We also know anxiety and depression are best friends, and exercise in and of itself can be helpful in combating depressed mood. So we want kids sleeping, we want kids exercising, we want kids eating healthy, diverse diets. When kids are hungry, it can actually mimic the sensations of anxiety. So they might interpret this tummy ache as, oh, I'm nervous, I shouldn't do this, when really we just needed to eat something. When you are dehydrated, you feel tired, you feel jittery. Those are mimicking sensations of anxiety, and it might put kids in the position of not doing something that they're actually fine to do. They're responding to appropriate cues. They're misunderstanding where the cue is coming from. So we need to make sure that they're sleeping, they're exercising, they're eating, they're drinking, they have appropriate downtime, right? You need time to think and reflect and plan and create and not put yourself in a situation where it's just go, 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 go constantly. And so you're in a constant state of panic about what's coming next and am I going to have time to do it and what's going to go wrong and what am I going to forget? And that We need to give kids downtime. Teenagers too, right? Little kids, it's easier because they have this built-in nap system, right? You know that kids will freak out if they don't have their nap. Teenagers like need that downtime too. It also helps reduce kind of what we call like the brain dump at the end of the night. You've been busy all day. You lay down to go to sleep. It's the first time your brain has had an opportunity to think about all of the stuff that has happened or is coming up. And now all of the big worries and stressors have space to kick around. And then it wakes us up and makes it hard to fall asleep. If we give ourselves time earlier in the day to pause and think and reflect, it reduces the likelihood of it happening at bedtime and then interfering with sleep. Electronic social media, right? We know that there is, at this point, the research is looking a little bit more, we've got correlational data, right? That shows increased levels of anxiety and mood issues with increased levels of electronics. I stress that it's correlational data, right? Because we can't say this causes this at this point. We need to do some longitudinal studies to have a better understanding of the causal relationship. But we can definitively say anxiety goes up, social media, electronics goes up, right? They go up together. There's a number of reasons why this might be the case. We're still kind of knee deep in researching some of this stuff. We've heard about the blue light being kind of an activator, right? It teaches our brain to be awake instead of get ready to go to sleep. So it interferes with our sleep, right? So then teenagers are savvy and they'll say, oh, I'm just going to turn on the warm light on my electronics. Well, it's a time suck too, right? You scroll through it and you meant to go to sleep at 10 o'clock and now it's midnight. Not because you intended to go to sleep at midnight, but because it's a time suck. It can also agitate you, right? You're looking through Instagram, you're looking through snaps, and there is information that actually activates anxiety, right? Because now you're worried, like they were having fun, they were doing this, they're good at that. I wasn't invited, I wasn't included, I'm not good at that, I don't look that way. It starts that emotion kicking, that motion triangle kicking up. We get physiologically activated, can't go to sleep, get stressed, right? So, the other thing is when we think about kind of a global world, there are wonderful things that come from having access to information from around the world. However, we are also exposed to stressors that we may not otherwise be exposed to. War, famine, crises, polar bears not having ice, all of these things that kids are learning about and having exposure to that probably stress them out because their brains have not gotten to the point where they can handle everything that's terrible in the world. And they have the opportunity to replay things. I can watch this bad thing over and over and over and over and over, and it's going to impact my emotions. And then we think about schoolwork kinds of things, right? Learning how to study, learning how to time management, learning how to reduce stress, are skills that, that are just healthy functioning skills and will help you reduce anxiety. And then we want to focus on helping kids learn how to focus on the process of learning, the process of taking tests, the process of navigating new schools, the process of pushing through challenges. Those are just good life lessons that can facilitate just development over time, and that are just good healthy behaviors. All right, so I think we can go on to the last content slide. When you need professional help, from a mental health perspective, we've got really good treatments for anxiety if it has crossed that line into interfering and significant. Cognitive behavioral therapy, there are versions of it that are for individuals, and there are versions of it that involve families. Targeting parental accommodations. We talked about that idea of like teaching parents to allow their kids to experience the world and encourage them and have confidence that they can do so safely. We know that the COVID pandemic has impacted kids and family in a number of ways. Anxiety has gone up quite a bit in the last couple of years. in part because there is an increase in actual danger and safety issues, right? But there's also an increase in perceived danger and risk. Our activities and opportunities for skill development have been limited. What has been determined to be safe has been limited. And so kids haven't had as many opportunities to get out there and try different stuff and develop that sense of confidence and competence. And we're frankly all a little bit out of practice at dealing with distress through kind of pushing ourselves into new activities, into different things, into new experiences, conversations with new people. So we're all a little out of practice with that. Physical health, I think, Rachel, you're going to talk a little bit about that.
Yeah, and I'll also point out that if, for our 0 to 5 age group, the pandemic has, really limited opportunities to develop interactive skills, things that would be, standard of going to preschool, going to childcare, going to play groups. Those things all went away. So we have, groups of kids that just aren't having those social opportunities, and parents are very isolated, so they're not having those opportunities. So then we see higher anxiety with that group and less recognition or flagging of somebody who's in need. When we're looking at physical health, there absolutely are, at age appropriate and when needed, there are medication options to help children either within the moment anxiety or ongoing. And again, that is about turning down the volume. It is not making the anxiety go away. In terms of managing GI symptoms, I'm going to try and talk really fast because I know there's some really great questions in the chat. We try and help kids recognize what's going on, mind and body, right? We've talked about that a few times. So we want to make sure kids are eating. We want to make sure they're moving. We want to make sure they're sleeping. We want to work on that mindfulness. A lot of times anxiety is about pulling our brain far, far into the future. So we want to work on bringing our brain back to where our feet are. And again, for our 0 to 5, when we're looking at terms of educational support, there are things like early intervention programs or the intermediate unit programs, which are that transition from 3 to 5. So that can provide developmental teachers, speech and language, OT, PT, to help families who have kids who might be on the spectrum who are also dealing with a lot of anxiety. So then we might have like IFSPs working towards goals and implementing strategies to reduce anxiety before school entry.
And once kids are elementary, middle, high school, even college, there are accommodations that can be helpful in school that are really focused. They're usually accessed, called a 504 plan. But the design is that, okay, what specific issues going on with particular kiddo, where can we meet them where they are right now? But then work towards approaching so that some of these accommodations are unnecessary because they've again experienced that confidence and competence by starting where they are and moving toward more self-sufficiency. All right, I think that gives us 7 minutes, right?
I've been trying to type some answers to questions as they go. Kristen, there is one that just came up in the chat about how do you handle the fear of children with the gun shootings lately? Not only does the child not want to leave the house, but parents are petrified to take their children anywhere. I have some thoughts, but I'll let you, if you want to jump in first, or I can jump in.
There's always going to be like a developmental consideration, right? How you talk to kids is going to depend on where they are in their developmental understanding of the world and use of language. And again, remember, anxiety is a helpful, normal emotion, right? So we can validate, of course, that is scary. That's terrifying. It's terrible. It's tragic. It's awful. We can validate it. We can also help kids understand that, they are also can be safe as well, right? You can acknowledge that there is danger, but there's also safety too. And so we have to think a little bit about, like, how old are you talking to? An 18-year-old is different than a 2-year-old in terms of the information that you're going to share with them. But it's always a balance when there is objective risk and danger to talk about yes and. What were you going to say, Rachel?
I was going to say, absolutely. It is that, that developmentally appropriate, honest conversation of, yes, that's scary. And then a lot of times rooting back to, Mr. Rogers of who are the helpers? Always look for the caregivers and the helpers of to who you go to and can talk to, and focusing on what is true. What do we know to be true about, what's happening?
Another thing to always kind of thinking a little bit about these kinds of conversations, and it's not just specific to gun violence or risk, is kids and all of us, really frankly, feel quite anxious when we feel like there's nothing we can do. And so talking about, like, well, what are some things that we could do, not only to help you feel safe, to help our community be safe, to how we can adjust the way our culture handles things so that we can be part of helping move in a direction that feels like a better direction than just hanging out only in our fear.
Yeah. All right, Kristen, we have a question in the Q&A. It says, isn't there,
We're just about ready to run out of time.
Okay.
And people are starting to log off because we've reached that point. Jamal, was there one that you wanted to do, or should we let Rachel have this last question?
Nope, she got it. I think they answered the one that I was going to ask about the gun violence. So I'll let you take it away.
Yeah. Isn't there some research which indicates that social media and ICT use may actually be beneficial in dealing with anxiety for vulnerable student populations such as LGBTQ+?
Yeah, so when I kind of introduced that concept of social media, it can be tremendously helpful, right? For marginalized communities, for sure, being able to reach out to a broader net of networking and social world can absolutely feel very reassuring and supportive. It's both, right? There are ways in which it is helpful, useful, supportive, excellent. There are also ways in which it interferes and can be harmful and damaging. So you just being aware of both sides of that world and helping coach kids to understand how to use it in a way that is helpful and not hurtful.
And I would also add, when we talk about the LGBTQI+ population, we always want to make sure that they are connected to a support system. And, when we look at gender affirming care, nurturing positive support is one of the most important factors that we can have.
All right. Well, with that, we are at 3:58, and I want to acknowledge and be mindful of our time. I want to thank you both for a very interesting, resourceful conversation about anxiety. And with that, I will turn it over to Nancy so she can close us out.
Thank you, Jamal. They were amazing. That's the only thing I have to say. They were amazing. Let me tell you that our next presentation is getting off to a good start, the importance of early childhood to lifelong health. And our speaker is Dr. Amy Herschel, and it will be on Thursday, June 30th from 2:30 to 4.
Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you next time.
Thank you.
Everyone.